Welcome to the final unit of Public Speaking and Persuasion. This is the persuasive unit. The entire course has been preparing you for this, so let's get started. Before we dive in, let's talk about why persuasive speaking is so important. According to your Practically Speaking textbook, persuasion is an integral part of being a lawyer, manager, administrator, salesperson, public relations specialist, politician, consultant, religious leader, and so many more. If you plan to go into any of these fields or something similar, you will have to speak persuasively at some point in your life, if not very frequently. Now that we've established the need for studying persuasive speaking, click on the arrow to get started. First, let's define persuasion. Persuasion is a communication process of converting, modifying, or maintaining the attitudes and/or behaviors of others. Persuasion implies a perception of choice. When you ask the audience to do something, they can choose to follow along or not. If your speech was effective, they will choose to support you. However, they don't have to. Persuasion is not coercion, which removes the ability to choose by implementing force, the threat of force, or intimidation. For example, if I tell my son, eat your dinner or you're not getting a snack, I'm using coercion. If I say, eat your dinner so you're not hungry later, I'm implying that he can choose to eat or choose to be hungry. Now let's talk about the potential goals of persuasion. Click the arrow to advance to the next slide. There are 3 goals of persuasion, as I hinted at in the previous slide. A persuasive speech can aim to convert the audience. In this case, you are trying to move the audience from believing one thing to believing something completely different. With modification, you're attempting to change their beliefs slightly. Maybe you introduce new information that makes them question a currently held belief. With maintenance, you know that the audience is in favor of your solution, and you're trying to get them to continue supporting it. Think of persuasion on a spectrum. Conversion is unlikely to happen, but if it did, it would be moving them from either the left to the right or the right to the left. To visualize this, let's do an activity. Stand up. Now turn around and face the other direction. This is conversion. Stay standing. From where you are, take one small step to either the right or the left. You're close to the same position you were before, but you only moved slightly. This is modification. Stay standing again and don't move. This is maintenance. Use these terms when formulating your specific purpose statements. You can say things like, to maintain the audience's commitment to recycling, or to modify the audience's understanding of electric vehicles, or to convert the audience to a vegetarian diet. Remember, conversion takes time. It's not going to happen in one speech. Once you understand these basic principles of persuasion, click the arrow to advance to the next slide. Persuasion is, at its core, aimed at changing the audience's behaviors. According to your textbook, it's not sufficient to change their attitude. We have to change what they're doing. There are a few ways to do this. First is through direct experience. If you have ever owned an electric vehicle, for example, you're qualified to attest to their efficiency through your direct experience. When using this tactic, think about how you can relate your experience to the audience. They don't care how it helped you. They want to know how it can help them. For example, does it really save money, or are you just paying more on your electric bill instead of paying for gas? Your personal experience can help your audience make a choice. Next is social pressure. The everyone is doing it factor can be hugely persuasive. This is prominent in younger audiences, especially teens, but it can be very effective with adults as well. When everyone is setting New Year's resolutions or trying to look good for their summer beach vacation, and you're over there eating a cookie, you're going to feel left out and judged. Finally, the audience will consider the effort required to support your solution. Switching from eating a cookie to eating a salad isn't very difficult, but purchasing a new car that can be upwards of $30,000 might take some doing and might even be impossible for some members of your audience. Think about appropriate requests for action when considering your topic and writing your speech. A final note: when your topic is relevant and relatable and is of significant impact, they will be willing to participate even if more effort is required. Regardless, asking for the simplest behavior change possible will make your speech the most effective. Click the arrow to advance to the next slide. Next, let's talk about proposition. A proposition is the primary overriding claim for your persuasive speech. Think proposal. A proposition presents a controversial claim, limits the issues, and states a desired point of view. I don't know about you, but that sounds a lot like a thesis statement to me. This proposition or thesis statement will provide the foundation, a roadmap, for your entire speech. There are a few kinds of propositions that we need to consider. First is the proposition of fact. This alleges the truth. For example, eating healthy is good for your body. Your audience would have a hard time challenging this statement. Next is proposition of value. This calls for a judgment on an issue. For example, Uber, the smartest way to get around. I want to be smart. I guess I'll use an Uber. Finally is a proposition of policy. This calls for a change in how problems are handled. For example, pollution is a serious problem and we need to do something to fix it. Regardless of what kind of speech you'll do, you'll need to follow Monroe's motivated sequence. We talked about this earlier on in the semester, but let's review. Click the arrow to advance to the next slide. We've been talking about Monroe's motivated sequence throughout the course. It is the overarching principle for this course, and you will use it to its fullest extent in this speech and in your research paper. Authorship of this sequence is up for debate, but Alan H. Monroe is giving credit in most of the literature. He, and his colleagues, said that most people are motivated to do things in a series of events. If you can follow this sequence, he said, you can get an audience to buy in and do just about anything. It has become a popular strategy for infomercials. Pay attention next time you're watching TV for those as seen on TV products and how they persuade you to buy. Here's how it goes. In the attention step, you have to make the audience want to listen. Start with an interesting or funny quote, a startling statistic, or a short narrative. In any case, you're saying, hey, listen up. Next, you must establish a need. Show your audience that there is a very real problem that needs addressing and that it affects them personally. If it doesn't, they'll probably stop listening at this point. Third, satisfy the audience's desire to fix this problem, even if it's not one they knew they had. Don't worry, we can solve it. Fourth, show, don't just tell. What will your solution look like in action? Present both sides. What will happen if the audience follows your plan? What if they don't? To visualize worst-case scenarios, go to YouTube and search for DirecTV commercials. While a customer is waiting for the cable guy, who is inevitably late, he ends up robbing a convenience store. It escalates quickly, but it's an effective way to show that DirecTV claims faster and better customer service than cable. Finally, tell the audience and be very specific about what they can do. If you want them to consider purchasing an electric car, don't ask them to go make a purchase right away. Tell them to go take a test drive. If you want them to start eating a vegetarian diet, ask them to start by removing meat from one meal a day. A small ask is more likely to get results than a big ask. Now let's talk about culture and persuasion. Click the arrow to advance to the next slide. Persuasion is mostly a Western concept. In America especially, we're a very individualistic culture. We value personal autonomy and creativity, privacy, individual liberties, and we like a little competition. We tolerate and even encourage nonconformity. Eastern cultures, which tend to be more collectivist in nature, value group harmony and cooperation. They try to conform and will sacrifice, so to speak, individual desires for the sake of the group. When preparing a persuasive speech, you have to consider your audience. Those that are more individualistic will be easier to persuade. More collectivist audience members might be uncomfortable with and even completely opposed to the persuasive strategy because it involves debate, which can lead to friction and is undesirable in their culture. That does it for Chapter 15. Let's check your understanding. It's time for the chapter checkup. Think about your own topic. What goal or specific purpose is most appropriate for your speech? Take a minute and write this down either in your research log or on your persuasive outline, or both. What proposition will you make? Jot down an idea or two in your log or under thesis on your outline. Don't worry, you can edit this later on. How will you change your audience's behavior? Again, make a note in your research log or on your outline under action. Remember, you can change this later if necessary. Finally, what, if any, special considerations do you need to make for your audience? Again, make a note in your log or somewhere on your outline or in your notes. Once you've completed these questions, click the arrow to move on to Chapter 16. Chapter 16 is all about persuasive speaking strategies. Ethos enhances the speaker's credibility. We are looking specifically at how you identify with the audience. You should appear confident, trustworthy, and be dynamic in your speech and actions. Pathos uses emotional appeals to persuade the audience. Be cautious with emotional appeals of fear, anger, sadness, and guilt. These can seem manipulative to the audience, and they can damage your ethos. Logos uses logic to support your arguments. Look for quality supporting material and cite your sources accurately. Where pathos typically uses narratives, logos uses statistics, facts, and strong evidence. When planning your speech, think about framing. In other words, choose your words carefully. If I told you, "Sorry, you're not working hard enough to pass the course. I guess you're just going to fail," you might feel offended, helpless, and discouraged. If, on the other hand, I said, "Your grade seems to be suffering. Is there something affecting your performance? Is there anything I can do to help?" I'm basically saying the same thing, expressing concern for your performance in the course, but I'm doing so in a way that encourages conversation and offering an opportunity to come to a solution. You should consider this when planning your speech. You might consider using a strategy called cognitive dissonance. In this strategy, you point out apparent inconsistencies. When a person holds two ideas or beliefs that are inconsistent or their attitude doesn't match their behavior, it creates an uncomfortable feeling, and they have to do something to reconcile it. For example, when you find out how many calories are in a Big Mac meal, you might feel guilty every time you eat one. That is cognitive dissonance. You might continue eating them, but you can't unknow the calorie count. If knowing makes you uncomfortable, so uncomfortable that you stop eating them, you have resolved your cognitive dissonance. That's it for persuasive strategies. Let's check your understanding. Click the arrow to move to the next slide. It's time for the chapter checkup. How will you enhance your ethos or credibility with your audience? Take a minute and make a note in your research log. Next, think about pathos. What emotional appeals might you make to your audience without being too manipulative? Finally, think about what challenge questions your audience might ask after hearing your speech. Take a minute and write down some of these questions in your research log. While you don't have to answer all of them in your speech, you should be familiar with them and prepare some answers if the questions arise. Click the arrow to advance to the next slide. If you have any questions about persuasion, please contact me. Send an email or a text, or call me.